All right, welcome everyone to the Analytics Instrumentation Sync on the 13th of August, 2024. The main topic for today is the new milestone, I guess. So I'm gonna share my screen so that we can quickly start going through the milestone. And there's 2 points there I think we can kind of maybe have a bit more discussion on because we have some time today. There's no other topics, as far as I know, apart from a small showcase at the end. So we should have some time for discussion during the milestone presentation. All right. So I think everyone can see the screen. We're talking about 17.4. It's already a new milestone. This one's one of the longer ones again, so it's going to be 25 days, 5 weeks instead of 4. We have some carryover that we still want to finish up. Also some things that are related to last quarter's OKRs that we definitely still want to kind of finish. But the focus is going to be going forward is going to be on the OKRs that we all decided upon for Q3 that we want to kind of start working on in earnest. Now I think we've already did some prep work, but now we should really get started. Since Anuja isn't here, I'm going to just cover both the product prioritized list and the engineering prioritized one. On the product prioritized list, we have some carryover related to additional properties, specifically adding it in the front end. I think that's still already in review. Updating the generator to allow more than these 3 properties. We also have some carryover with regards to pairing. I think that there's ongoing discussions there. I would leave it to the people assigned, so in this case Nico or Mihao and Jonas, to close those as soon as you think that kind of initial discussions are done. And it's in the hand with the state of the stages to kind of carry it on and actually kind of implement something. Yeah, just please keep that in mind. Whenever there's no more things happening, close those, because we already had, as far as I know, some sessions there, some kind of interactions, but as things were ongoing, we didn't want to close it yet. All right. So then the new product prioritized work. I think that's the one that we can spend the most time on. The first one is going to be enabling internal event tracking on Switchboard. Right now, that's an epic. So we're still discussing the issues. So that's one of the problems of kind of the carryover of, okay, we just started kind of locking down our OKRs, and now we already want to start working on them, so we don't have everything kind of nailed down yet. And I think the first question, actually the first discussion point, is related to this. So I think we've referenced Switchboard a bunch of times. It's a external application that's used to manage dedicated instances that users of dedicated instances, or I would assume mostly admins of dedicated instances, that interact with, and they want to start tracking events. And we need to make sure that they start tracking events in a way that's compatible with our data warehouse schemas, that it doesn't require additional modeling work as far as possible. And now the question is, how do we want to do that? And I think all of you should have been tagged there, but so far it was mostly me and Ankit discussing. The big question here is, do we want to, at least from my point of view, do we want to instrument Switchboard, what's it called, in a, I don't know, unique or separate manner? So kind of install Snowplow there, create track event calls and all of those things specifically for Switchboard, Or do we want to use that opportunity to create something like an SDK that covers most of our functionality, like configuring Snowplow in the correct way, so to exposing a track event call in the way that we want, working with event definitions in the way that we want, like kind of building common functionality into an SDK that we can then implement in Switchboard, so that we can then use the same SDK with other Ruby applications as well. Notably, right now, that would be customers.gitlab.com, which is another Ruby application that already has Snowplow installed there, but it's not tracking things in a necessarily like internal events compatible way right now. And that's part of our OKRs as well, to kind of at least document all the events that customers.gitlab.com is tracking. So yeah, I think that's one of the questions. And I think since the discussion has stalled a bit between me and Ankit, it would be interesting to hear from some of the engineers on the call what you think about what we should do there.
I have one question, Basti. What is Switchboard, just to be on the same page with you to understand? Is it some other additional application or any kind of mechanism? What is Switchboard?
Yeah. Switchboard
just
is a separate
brief
application.
Explanation.
Switchboard
Okay.
is a separate application. It's a separate Rails application. I mean, do you know about customers.gitlab.com?
Yeah. I know about that. I use it extensively, yes.
Yeah, so that's a separate application as well, right? It has some connections to GitLab instances, but it sits separately from it, right? It's a completely separately deployed application. Deployment mechanism is separate. Everything's completely separate, and it interacts with multiple GitLab instances. It's not specific to GitLab.com. It can interact with self-managed and dedicated instances. Switchboard is kind of similar, but it's specific to dedicated instances, to GitLab dedicated instances, and it allows for the configuration of those dedicated instances. So it allows customers that ordered dedicated instances to have some kind of control over their instances. I don't know, I think, Ankit, you've went with the PM of Switchboard through the application. Do you have some examples of what customers can configure through Switchboard?
They can basically configure basically there are a number of parameters like how many jobs should run. Like I don't remember the exact, but it was a configuration, and like customers can put their custom YML file, the configuration file. So it can be an agent like GitLab success engineers or customer themselves. They can do that. Yeah.
Okay. I understand now. Thanks for this explanation. But mainly the next question for us is enable internal event tracking on Switchboard issues, probably how you should organize and instrumentalize the metrics. So probably the question for you is how we are involved here. Should you allow an additional data? We need to create a pipeline, or should we flow through the existing pipeline, etc. So probably that's the discussion, right, Basti?
I think so. From my point of view, that's already decided that we don't want to create any additional work for you. So ideally, it completely flows through. The only difference might be that there's like one parameter, like the app ID of the Snowplow event is different. But otherwise, there's no, at least from my point of view, there's no reason why it should use a separate pipeline completely. Customers.gitlab.com at this point already sends events through the existing pipeline. Switchboard doesn't at all, but in general, we can configure it the same way we can that customers.gitlab.com was configured. However, ideally, I think what we do is, so for example, with customers.gitlab.com, people working on that were kind of left alone. They were told like, okay, you can point Snowplow to this endpoint and it's gonna kind of flow through. But they configured completely their own schemas and ways it works, which then creates problems like additional modeling work, for example, to work with those additional schemas. And it can create problems that it's harder to switch when you track an event on, like, because there's loads of engineers that work, for example, on both customers.gitlab.com and gitlab.com itself. And I would assume the same is happening for Switchboard. So if we if we completely leave it to them to define Snowplow, to kind of instrument Snowplow however they want, the problem becomes that they're going to do whatever, like it's going to be completely different to what's happening on the main instance, which is going to make it hard to transition. There's going to be difference between the events, but also the way how instrumentation happens.
I understand.
Yeah.
The only way what I see can communicate with the analytics engineers to explain to them, okay, maybe you should have, or you will have a new app ID in Snowplow, so probably they need to model something on their side, but actually data will automatically flow under the existing pipeline. That is what is important for us.
Yeah.
So thanks for that.
I just for myself, I try to kind of visualize how things are happening, or what was everything connected, and that's a lot of arrows actually. But still, I think it might help understanding what's happening, or make sure that we are all on the same page. So we have our Snowplow pipeline that runs into Snowflake, right? And already GitLab.com is sending events there. We also have self-managed instances and dedicated instances, and we have other systems that run within the realm of GitLab. So all of this is happening within like our infrastructure. And there's, apart from GitLab.com, we have things like the AI gateway running, we have customers.gitlab.com running, and we have the switchboard running. And the difference is here that self-managed instances or dedicated instances, they're not directly connected to Snowplow yet, at least, right? They're not sending events right now. But customers.gitlab.com is already sending events, and self-managed instances, dedicated instances, and GitLab.com are connected to it. And Switchboard is supposed to start sending events. AI Gateway is also already sending events, and it's also connected to all those different instances. And I think we already created amended our standard context, for example, to have something like a global user ID, to include things like the instance ID and so on. So we've already built it in a way that it makes it easier for things like customers.gitlab.com or Switchboard to communicate events in a standardized manner, right? And so again, I think from my perspective, the question is like, how do we want to now go about implementing tracking on Switchboard? Do we do it in an isolated manner where we just look at Switchboard and just make sure that it's set up correctly? Or do we take a step back and think about something like an SDK that we can then include in other places, for example, customers.gitlab.com, or maybe at some point even at gitlab.com. I think that was also an idea that we had at some point, that some of our functionality we might actually be able to kind of pull out into an SDK and develop separately. Like for example, the functionality around sending events, not necessarily the Redis HCL and so on stuff, because that's very specific to how GitLab instances work, but everything around how we configure Snowplow, kind of having a wrapper around Snowplow, similar to what we did with product analytics.
What about adding it like without an SDK first, and then extracting the SDK when we kind of know what's how that works? So then we can use it on customers gitlab.com afterwards.
So I'm thinking like, how much logic can we extract from existing like gitlab.com and add it in the SDK, and that we can use? If it's a lesser effort, that way we can go with SDK route.
Yeah, I was also going to say, maybe we need to check like what efforts it would need to go with the SDK route, and if it's something that's not going to take so much effort, then maybe we can just implement one-time solution that we can also use in other places like the customers at gitlab.com. but it's going to take so much effort, then maybe we can first build like a simple solution for the switchboard, and then maybe think about a more broader solution as a future improvement or something.
Yeah, one more thing here could be that we also have this separate OKR for discovering all the events in metrics dictionary, which require all events to have some definitions. So it's possible that we'll want to make it so that the SDK checks if we have a definition. And in this case, that would kind of force us to use an SDK on switchboard in case we want to, for example, keep the event definitions consistent and on different repos.
The one thing
We
I'm
could,
also
we could also go instead of including the definitions in the SDK, we could do a runtime check. Right. I mean, there's or we could use the. Couldn't we use the, instead of sending directly, we could send it through the GitLab.com instance? No.
No.
That's not an option. Yeah.
Yeah. So Switchboard has no knowledge of GitLab.com. GitLab.com has no knowledge of Switchboard, and
Okay.
that's something we definitely want to keep.
Okay.
They don't interact with each.
Okay,
Like they
but-
kind of exist in different worlds, because you could take away GitLab.com and Switchboard would still make sense, right? Because it's for dedicated instances. They also are completely separate.
True. Yeah. Okay. So then we do kind of need this global definition dictionary somewhere.
Mm.
Yeah. I think this came up somewhere.
Either in the SDK or in some other service.
So I
Yeah,
think we need
actually,
some kind of shared
like-
logic around
Mhm.
that. That's definitely the case. Like wherever the definitions themselves live, that's maybe a different decision. But yeah.
I think adding the definitions to the SDK. Well, it depends, of course. Like if we kind of create the SDK, like kind of as a in a pipeline, kind of extract the information from the main repo, not extract it, but kind of what can you call it? Probably compile or generate new versions of the SDK based on the main repo. I think that could work, but I think if we move to actually extracting an SDK and having and we put the definitions in there, that would mean that you would have to update the SDK in the main repo every time you create a new definition, and that sounds like a path we don't want to walk.
So
Yeah, but for example, we could with the SDK just make sure that the definitions have a specific structure, and then have the definition files separately on different repos. And then the SDK would still be necessary so that we make sure that the event definitions look the same in all the repos, but we wouldn't need to update it every time we add a new definition.
yeah. And the
So,
SDK.
sorry.
The SDK
Would that mean that we would have? Oh, go ahead. Would that mean we have several repos for? Like we would have the definition split out over several repos.
Yes, it would mean that. Although
Okay.
I am not sure how is the discussion going inside the issue with all events and events dictionary. Like, is this the approach that we want to go, or do we want to keep all the definitions in some singular repo? Do you know, Ankit?
I think we don't have a consensus yet on that. Like it's still open for us to decide.
And I think while it is an important decision, I think maybe going back to the original part of, okay, do we want to create an SDK, or how do we want to kind of start with instrumenting switchboard? Regardless of where the event definition files are kept, there is some part of interacting with them that would need to be consistent across switchboard, customers.gitlab.com, and gitlab.com in the end. Right. And so from my perspective, going back also to Jonas's original point of, okay, couldn't we just instruments, like make sure the switchboard, all the functionalities are available in switchboard, and then turn it into an SDK? I think that to me feels more like an important decision to make now of, or at least somewhat, how do we want to ideally go about this? Because I'm actually not sure what's easier. Because I think when we create an SDK first, the boundaries are very clear, right? So you create something that has clear APIs and where you expose certain things. So you need to think about it from the start as a separate piece of code that gets imported and used through very specific parts. That might make development a bit in the beginning a bit harder, because it's like it's not integrated yet, right? So you're developing the SDK, and for actually testing it, you would need to integrate it into, for example, the switchboard, and then start doing things to see if it works as expected. At the same time, I'm not sure how easy it is if we now start out with building something into switchboard directly to then go back and extract it.
I think I would be in favor of copying over whatever we need from the main repo, make it like almost consider it as a spike, put it into production, see it work, and then turn it, then kind of define the interfaces and turn it into an SDK. I think it's in the spirit of iterating. I think it's the best we can do. I mean, we can split it up in simple things as making sure we can configure snowplow, making sure we can send a single event, kind of adding that we can make sure the events have a certain format, that we put metric wherever we put the event definitions.
Yeah, I think,
whereas if we do the SDK, we kind of need to make a lot of those decisions before we deploy anything.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jonas on that. So starting with inside the switchboard, it is easier compared to SDK, because we need to think about event definition and how will we get that in SDK and validate it. But if we keep inside the switchboard and keep a separate module for tracking inside the switchboard, so afterwards, like when we think about creating an SDK, I think it would be easier that way.
All right. Cool. Feel free, everyone, to kind of also share your opinion in the linked issue, because that will make it easier to because then it's documented. But yeah, I think so. Then the next step would be to break it down, if we all agree on that, similar to what Jonas said. All right, then I would move on in the interest of time to the next few items. So we have a request instrument a service ping metric for number of dual seats assigned. That should be quite easy. We have support from the fulfillment team where we can pair with someone. They're kind of unfamiliar with how to instrument metrics. because they work mostly on customers.gitlab.com. So it would be good if someone from our side picks that up and then pairs with Bishwa from their side. Then also a big carryover from last quarter is to reintroduce metric and event to product category mapping. So that is something that we already had until roughly a year ago. Then we removed it, and I think I'm not going to revisit the whole discussion around how we should link metrics to kind of functionality, but that's what we ended up with. The main difference to before is that it came up that theoretically a feature can belong to multiple categories, which means that a metric also can belong to multiple categories. So I think we have to build it in a way to support that, so that it's not a specific product category, but it can be multiple ones. And we still have the, like, somewhere in the repository from over a year ago, we still have the data of previously assigned product categories. So that's something that we can refill back in. Yeah, so that's also something we need to, or we should do then. That's also going to take some amount of revisiting of whether these product categories are actually still up to date. Then we come to the next point. I think that maybe warrants at least a bit of discussion, is reducing the amount of boilerplate code and duplication within new analytics instrumentation. There's so I think we all have agreement on removing distributions from metric and event definition, because that's not a value that's being used in the data warehouse, as far as we know, and that we've checked with the data analysts. And at the same time, it's already documented through the file structure, something being in a CE or EA directory, so it's kind of superfluous information. The other thing I think warrants a bit more discussion is the next suggestion was using time frame as a dimension of a metric definition. So in essence, kind of right now we have 2 metrics if there's a weekly and a monthly version of something, and an all-time version, then it's like 3. And the idea was to condense that down and say, okay, we have a single metric definition that can contain multiple time frames. So everything else is the same across the metric definition. The only difference is that within the metric definition, we would have, for example, 7-day and 28-day. I'm trying to find if there's an example, but I don't know. There was a big discussion also with an alternative suggested solution of creating a system where we can put multiple other metrics into one metric definition. So one metric definition can actually create multiple metrics. I think the latest one, Sarah, create here. So you would, for example, say, okay, I'm depending on a bunch of events. I still have these kind of general keys like the product group and so on, milestone, and then I have a bunch of metrics that I'm defining. And I think that's something that we just need to kind of figure out which way we want to go right now. So we have the option to kind of think about a setup where we condense down multiple, what we now have as different metric files into one, so to only have one file, and thereby kind of condense down the amount of keys that are kind of duplicate, because especially all the things that's added here, so the product group and milestone and so on, wouldn't no longer need to be duplicated across all these different metrics, or versus just looking at the time frame. At least from my side, the idea behind the time frame was to consider it more as still consider it kind of a single metric, and it's just different variants of the same metric, because that's what it always felt like to me personally. Like if you look at a weekly and a monthly, like everything's the same. The only difference is that one metric has the underscore weekly, the other metric has the underscore monthly. But literally everything else is the same and should also be the same. I think that's for me the important part, that between, if you have a weekly and a monthly version of a metric, they actually should be the same apart from the time frame, because otherwise confusion happens, right? If there's like different events in there or a different filtering or something is different across the two of them, that would be very strange. So that's why I would consider them different versions of the same metric. But I think that's a kind of what Sarah points out correctly, is that this is kind of a mindset shift, because right now we, by the virtue of having different files, we consider those separate metrics, right? There's a separate key path, there's a separate, everything that's a completely separate file. So weekly and monthly are completely separate things. Yeah, so what do you guys think?
I think it's quite also important to take a bit conservative and just not to remove things just for the sake of making it shorter. Because, for example, if we unite multiple metrics or events in one file, we probably just reduce burden of not a burden even, a complexity of creating each one of these files and kind of a code base, but then we greatly reduce kind of from usage point of view, when you have one file, like same for everything, like for database table, we have one file, one table. For feature flags, we have one feature flag, one table. And it's kind of uniform around the whole app. And if we just put 10 metrics, sometimes 10, sometimes 5, sometimes 20 in one file, this will be more difficult to look for it and just support and then parse it and verify and a lot of other things. And if metric gets deleted, then we need to update this metric and make sure you delete it weekly, not monthly. And it's it's a trade-off, but I would suggest to take it a bit conservative, be cautious.
But does that mean you would be in favor of not doing either of those things, or
I haven't dived into these discussions too deep. I think they're good proposals, yeah, like but drastically changes things. Like, why don't we put everything in one file? Probably time frames makes total sense for me. Yes, I totally agree. And if we add one weekly, if they didn't ask, and if we report it, nobody will even probably notice. I mean, it's fine. It makes sense actually, yeah. But multiple metrics, maybe we should do it. We should really like look at from many points of view. If I tomorrow remove one metrics, how do I remove it for a file and make sure I don't remove something else? Or a lot of things becoming very different and mindset becoming very different. How many metrics is okay to put in one file? 5 or 10? And things like that. It's more small remark in general, sorry, just without many details and just
Thanks a lot.
just as I think. Yeah, because yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Sarah made one comment with all of these questions, like how many metrics should we put in one file, etc. But then Sarah also came up with an idea to make it kind of more strict, to have always this, to only handle the same set of files in a single file. Yeah, so these are basically the two propositions that we have now, either only different timeframes by one file or different different props of the same event array. So it could be the same event array, but counted by unique project, by unique user, or as a total count, all in the same file.
Well, because one of the things, and I will be talking about this tomorrow, I just preparing slides when I talk tomorrow about how we shift from engineering to user point of view. I like to remove all this extra meta information about this tracking events, right? It's simple. Here, there, like that, use and get result. But if we add, for example, unification one file, we need to document it somewhere, how many metrics, right? And why do we put it here? And if you search for metrics, where does it down, right? Cannot just search by file name anymore if you put it in a view. or if we have a metric name right now, it's in the key path, very easy to find that metric. But if we put few time frames in one file and few metrics in one file, it will be impossible because it will be probably constructed in runtime, right? Adding weekly and monthly and things like that. And it all has to be documented, and it's extra thing which we're doing. So weight is it usability and reduce. I mean, just my opinion, Rails and generally what we do in open source is not about making small and efficient, right? It's not C++, something like that. It's more about readability, maintainability. So yeah.
So from this,
I would say I'm very much in favor of somehow collapsing timeframes into a single metric definition. And I see all these arguments for how it can be confusing. I was just wondering if what if we changed the, so currently one metric is one key path and one value, right? That's kind of in general. It's not quite true because we also support custom, what do we call them?
Custom schema or something.
Yeah, custom schema or yeah, for metrics, which is not used a whole lot. But what if we change the kind of the default schema for metrics to not be a single value, but be a hash that has the weekly and monthly and maybe all value, and kind of say that is what is under the key path is always this structure. I mean, there's all kind of migration things and issues to but if we kind of change because that would mean that we could still tell people we have one metric for each metric definition file. Right? It's just we change the definition of a metric to be 2 or 3 values instead of 1.
I think from my point of view, that's the important part. If we do the timeframes shift, we need to commit to this idea of a metric consists of, or at least this kind of metric, like a metric that just counts occurrences, consists of multiple values for the different timeframes. And I think that's the mindset shift we definitely need to do, because otherwise it makes and document and carry on everywhere so that it makes sense to people. Because otherwise it can definitely become confusing. But I think also just to finish it up, I think the big thing for me is that, for example, a lot around questions of maintainability and so on. For example, when it comes to removal of events or adding of events and all these kinds of things, we know that these always get added together, right? So at the very least, 7-day and 28-day of the events always, or nearly always, gets added. And if it's not being added, then it's some kind of weird oversight. And there's also no reason to not add it. And the same is for removal. Why would you remove it? Normally it's because the feature is no longer being used. So that's why you remove the metric. Then also you need to remove it specifically for all timeframes. Or if it changes product group, all of these need to change product group. It's kind of this, it is kind of one thing, at least in my mind, regardless of the time frame.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say it, and I was like wanted to agree in a way that if we remove timeframes, it probably would make sense and not just introduce extra abstraction kind of simplification, but to change the way that metrics are created. People don't think about 7 days, 28 days, or whatever. They just introduce metrics, and they for free receive total, weekly, and monthly. as I don't even think we need 2 metrics, 3 metrics, 28 metrics, or 28. They can create only 1 or 3, 1 to 3, but they don't think, they don't create 3 files, they create 1 file, and they create, and they received this payload, as correctly you must say, just weekly, monthly, total. That's it by default. Extra headache from us to support 3 type of metrics, 3 type of definition. Extra headache from people to create thousands of files. And that's it. They don't even exist kind of time frames in the people at all. They just always receive it. That could be actually elegant solution, but kind of rethinking the way, right? Completely. There's no 7 days, 28 days. There is just a metric. And you create and you receive it for free, even if you don't need it. Oh, okay, you don't need it, but
Okay. Since we're kind of short on time, I think that was very valuable discussions, still laying out all the arguments. Seems like we're again kind of going more into the favor of the time frame, using time frame as I mentioned, and then I think we can a lot of these things like the schema and so on can be implementation details that we now clear up going forward. Cool. The other things I'm just gonna go quickly over. Let me know if there's any questions. So we want to include correlation ID into the GitLab standard context. The correlation ID, for those of you who don't know, is a ID that gets automatically created for every kind of request to make it traceable throughout all the different systems. Normally that's mostly used for logging, but there's no reason why we cannot add that to our events, which makes it easier to trace, to kind of correlate events across, like, okay, all of these events happened within the same request, within the same set of things. So that's going to enable a lot more analysis capabilities and shouldn't be hard to implement. Then we want to have all events visible in the metrics dictionary. We agreed that it's not going to be feasible to migrate all the existing snowplow events because there's like 200 of them on gitlab.com to showcase them that way in the metrics dictionary. Rather, as a first step, we want to add definitions for all snowplow events. And we can start with the GitLab backend because it's the smaller amount. So there's like 64 of them, I think, right now, or a bit more than 60. So we just want to add definitions for those. That already allows us to have them all documented and then should also make for easier migrations in the future because we have more knowledge about, okay, what are all these events? Who do they belong to? Do they somehow belong together? Is there like one product group that has a lot of them? Those kinds of things. We want to rethink the metrics dictionary. That kind of goes also to the point of, okay, where should event definitions live? How do they all end up in the metrics dictionary if they're no longer just for GitLab, the instance, but for separate services? That contains collecting use cases from metrics.gitlab.com, like understanding, okay, how do people use metrics.gitlab.com right now? Why do they use it? And then rethinking the architecture. And then the last thing is collaborating on a few Lighthouse metrics. I've already started reaching out to a few teams. On the Lighthouse metrics page, there's a few metrics that seem comparably easy to implement. Like, for example, settings for instances that people want to know, that we can definitely help and carry over the line to reach our goal of 15 additional Lighthouse metrics. And then we have a bunch of engineering time efforts. There's quite a bit of carryover from last milestone. I think the snowplow, snowcat stuff is now more clear, right, Miha? Because you had the debugging session yesterday, so it should be kind of closer to being closed.
Yes, we have some version of the image working already, but Open Snowcat wants to provide us an even better image.
Nice. Yeah. So a bunch of carryover, and then there's some refactorings related to Redis all-time counts, because I think by now everything's in review, or I think already potentially already merged all time counts conversions. So we can or should be able to get started removing any code that's no longer needed soon, including actually migrating those keys, so that we can get rid of the total counts overrides file. Yeah, and then there's a bunch of smaller issues, refactorings on the front end. We found some inconsistency between tiers and tier within metric and event definitions. And yeah, and we had some issues with Redis HL key migration that we want to make more testable to make sure that we don't mess up any migrations, which then creates wrong numbers. Any questions?
Regarding the reducing boilerplate code for metrics definition, I think there was some talk around removing the milestone since it can be fed from an MR link. Not sure if that was concluded or not, but it seems I don't think we added it yet, so I'm just wondering if that was concluded or we decided not to pursue that option.
I think, Miha, you kind of started that conversation, right?
Yeah, the conversation has started. Maybe it's just not included. Yeah, it's not included in the milestone. So maybe
we don't have a conclusion yet of whether we're going to do it, right? So I think for now we can just pursue the discussion of whether we can do it, whether we should do it, what are the impacts. Yeah. All right. Then I'd quickly hand over to Nico to give a short demonstration of monitor without Snowplow Micro.
Oh, but first, Radovan also for the question about the milestone.
No, we can. No, we are lack of time, Michael. Just want to confirm with you. I understand now what kind of in which file we want to remove the milestone. What I want to do is to check, do we have pipeline to load this data? I'm not sure. We have something, and then if we have a pipeline with Linux engineers to check how they use the milestone column, if that column is in use. So just want to be on the same page to understand what you propose. But yeah, I will let you know very, very quickly with the details what I find. So that's it. Yeah.
Sure. And yeah, I confirm what you wrote. Like this is what we meant.
Yeah, I just want to understand. Thanks a lot for that. Carry on, Basti, please.
Over to Nico.
Yeah, Nico.
Please apologize for my big font. It's not very well formatted. So the small modification we made, modification, small feature for our monitor script is it used to be quite a requirement for the developers to install Snowplow Micro, which involves installing Docker and run, configure, and everything. So the idea was that why do we actually need it if to run a monitor, right? To monitor events. So what's happened is we added a small HTTP server which starts with a monitor and act as a to intercept Snowplow events basically in runtime, just keep it in memory. So as you can see, I just configured and I just removed Snowplow Micro, and yeah, it's just not running. Yeah, and if I start monitor and just check the some events, it's automatically in a separate thread running a small server, very simple one, really. Right. And if we just need some event, it will be will be here visible. Yeah, and another small addition, thanks to Milano, we implemented this reset window. If you want to just reset it, then there is with clean memory. It works with both Simple Micro and our custom little server. Yeah, and yeah, it works.
Yeah,
Thank
nice
you.
that we were able to do it.
Quite interesting. I haven't worked with threads in many million years ago. Interesting. It works very
that's
different
true.
than sync. Yeah.
That's super cool. Then we should
Yeah, that's really
really
nice. Yeah.
really push that people people use it. I guess like also remind people to use it, because probably if people already did instrumentation are not using it because they still expect Snowplow Micro to be a requirement.
That's actually a good point. I think, although it's a smallish change, this might be worth it, Nico, to announce in engineering FYI and also add into the doc for engineering FYI, because this is definitely something where people might expect, like, okay, I've used it in the past. It requires Snowplow Micro. I don't want to deal with Docker and so on, so I don't want to use it. So kind of popularizing it more, that it doesn't require Docker and Snowplow Micro anymore, is quite cool. And I think it is really cool the way it works now. It makes it so much easier.
It actually happened with me in one of the pairing session. Like the person didn't have a Docker installed and like couldn't verify with monitor. So I think this is very cool. Like, thanks, Nico.
Oh, good. Thank you for the idea. I can't remember who introduced the idea, but yeah, that was really cool. I would never think about it. Maybe I would, but I didn't.
Yes. Cool. Any final questions? Anything we should still cover? Nope. Then thanks a lot for all
sorry,
the
So sorry, I will just use the opportunity and say that tomorrow at 2 a.m. UTC, I will be conducting a knowledge sharing session, and I will be just talking for the team, not just for myself as well, for the team, for everyone. How did we not little bit, actually, completely shift our mind from creating tools for targeted developer and specialists, like all these metrics, million metrics, super lengthy metrics and event definition, and how we change it to more user-friendly using abstraction, using monitor scripts, and using a CLI, which were a great help and completely transform the way people interact with our products. Yeah, like completely.
Cool. Yeah, I guess from the people here, mostly Ankit might be able to make it. I'm not sure if anyone else, unfortunately, can get up in the middle of the night. But this is really cool, and I'm looking forward to watching the recording. Please also advertise it throughout different channels and so on tomorrow during the day, so that others know about it, specifically in APAC, people that are online. This is really, really cool, kind of sharing more about our story. Right then. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone. See ya.